let me introduce to the stage Ms. Marta Kepe, Analyst for Defense, Security and Infrastructure at RAND Europe, and Senior Non-Resident Fellow at the Atlantic Council, who will moderate this debate.
Our panel indeed will be focused on European defense and defense industry, but not only that, because the EU exists within the constellation of many other actors. So over the last several years, we've seen an increased number and intensity of cyber-based attacks on government, but also public, private, and other actors. Earlier today, we heard some of the speakers say that cyber defense is a team sport, and we are only as strong in Europe as is our weakest link, which means really that EU exists within the constellation or a group of other actors, international actors such as NATO, but also private actors, industry as well, that really holds the skills and the capabilities that we need for defense, and also academia and public actors as well. So over the last years, we've also seen that cyber defense and security has become a really a strong topic on the EU agenda. But not only both on strategic level, so starting from the EU global strategy, but also all the way over to PESCO projects. With that, in the session, we're going to talk about the EU's role and the role of EU as a leader within cybersecurity and defense, but also what does it mean to cooperate with defense industry, NATO and other actors. How can we make the most of this cooperation? Where are the vulnerability factors as well? With that, and not to be a very lengthy barrier between you and lunch, because this is the last session before lunch, let me introduce our speakers today. So first we have Mr. Tomasz Zdzikot, who is the Secretary of Defense at the Polish Ministry of National Defense. Previously, he was also the Deputy Minister at the Ministry of Interior and Administration. In both positions, he's worked a lot on cybersecurity, and previously at the Ministry of Interior, he also worked on combating cybercrime. We also have Wolfgang Röhrig. He is the Head of Unit of Information Superiority at the EDA. He's been a key driving force between EDA's work on cybersecurity and defense, having shaped the cyber defense program there. And he's also served at the German Armed Forces Cyber and Information Domain Services headquarters, and he previously held officer-level positions at the German Navy and Joint Services. Colonel Jaak Tarien is the current director of the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence in Tallinn. And previously he was the commander of the Estonian Air Forces. And last but not least, we have a defense industry representative, Merle Maigre. Hello. Merle is the Executive Vice President at the Government Relations at CybExer Technologies, an Estonian cybersecurity company. Until last year, she was the Director of NATO Cyber Center of Excellence, and previously she's held the position of National Security Advisor of the current and previous Estonian president. So welcome to the panel. Without further ado, I will let you shortly speak about the topics that we're covering today, and I will start with Wolfgang as the EU representative here.
Yes, thank you for the invitation, and I think this is a good opportunity to bring closer to you the European activities on cyber defense, and to the understanding that this is clearly a priority area for capability development and research. But before I want to dive deep on cyber, let's start with some general figures about defense, because I think this is quite relevant. So the defense expenditures of EU member states in 2016 were about 2.8 billion euros, which brings it down to roughly 1.4% of the GDP of European member states. So just taking the hypothetical scenario, because we all know the discussions, this will be raised to 2% of the GDP. We are talking about, for example, for this year, about raising it to 322 billion euros for defense on an annual basis. Well, I compare this now with the figures spent for collaborative developments and purchases. So out of these 208 billions I mentioned for the last year, in 2016, 6.3 billions were spent in a collaborative manner for capability purchase and development, and just 143 million euros for research and development. So when you compare the figures, these are clearly breadcrumbs, and therefore I think we have to take into account to bring this in a more coherent way to have better value for money. We have to be better organized at a European level, and there is more debate needed just to talk about to raise it up to 2%, but it's more the question of how do we spend the available budget better. What definitely should be avoided is that we create a disconnect which would create a reduced interoperability of our forces. That's one of the important things. And we have to invest in innovation and innovative technologies like artificial intelligence and nanotechnologies, because we have to expect that these technologies will change the battlefield of future military operations. And here also Europe cannot stay behind. So the underlying idea I want clearly to convey is that what we spend, that we spend this better. And before, again, coming to cyber specifically, let's introduce a bit on the current developments in Europe. We clearly have at the moment a sense of change with respect to European defense. While working on the implementation of the EU global strategy, we are confronted with terms like PESCO, the Permanent Structured Cooperation, like CARD, the Coordinated Annual Review on Defense, the European Defense Fund, the EDIDP, and so on. So, what I already said before, we have to ensure that these building blocks, you can call them building blocks or also fragments, that we are employing these building blocks with the ultimate goal to turn this into something much more coherent than we experience today. Taking the example of the European Defence Fund, the Defence Fund is expected from our perspective to act as a catalyst for a stronger European defence industry that develops state-of-the-art technology and fully interoperable technology and equipment. So we expect this as a certain turning point, also in view of a strategic autonomy and competitiveness of European industry. And this for sure also includes the many small and medium enterprises and startups, which make in fact the breeding ground for innovative cyber solutions. I want to stress again the point, we have to achieve a better money for value in order to defend our citizens. So, coherence on the approach from priorities to impact in military operations. So for that end, we need the integration of priorities for the development of European capabilities. One of the instruments we have is the so-called Capability Development Plan, which was just recently in summer last year approved by the EDA Steering Board at the level of ministers. And this is a 4-year iterative process. And amongst the 11 priorities identified in this plan, for sure, cyber has its place with the headline, Enabling Capabilities for Cyber Responsive Operations. So the task is now to link these priorities with the different initiatives I mentioned in the beginning. So with PESCO, with CARD, with the EDIDP, with the European Defence Fund on a day-to-day basis for generating collaboratively developed capability projects in a way that the results contribute to a greater coherence. EDA, for the implementation of this capability, EDA since 2012 runs its own cyber defense program, and based on the last revision of this capability development plans, there are 5 centers of gravity. On the one hand side, the improved cyber defense skills of military personnel, the development of state-of-the-art cyber defense technologies, and following here a strongly system engineering and architectural approach. To improve coordination with other European agencies, Steve mentioned already the cooperation between EDA and the other 3 agencies, the approach to system engineering I mentioned, and the area of cyber defense research. And I think one of the things we clearly have to take into account to bring cyber defense measures in the other domains, air, maritime, land, and where appropriate also space. In order to conclude and to keep roughly in the 5 minutes given to me, I clearly want to stress the points before I hand over to my co-panelists and then into the panel discussion. The strategic landscape of European defense embodied in the CDP, CARD, PESCO, EDF, and so on, must be coherent and coordinated in support of improving military capabilities of EU member states. Not EU capabilities, member states' capabilities, also important to understand. We have set our priorities in accordance with the 5 topics I mentioned before. Here, especially in the field of research, the effort should be focused on forward-looking and innovative technologies, and for that EDA is in the process of agreeing and maintaining a cyber strategic research agenda. And the last point, improve cooperation. I mentioned already the cooperation we have with the other 3 agencies in the area, with the European Cybercrime Center, ENISA, and CERT EU. Here also to mention for sure is the NATO EU joint declaration and the already long-lasting cooperation we have since 2013 with the Center of Excellence in Tallinn. And that should conclude my input. I hope I was close to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Jaak, so we have the NATO EU cooperation going on. We also have NATO's cyber defense pledge. What is the take on from the other important international organization in this sector?
Right, you're bouncing the opposites off. You knew I was going to be slightly Eurosceptical, so clever plan. It's great to be in a panel right before lunch because everyone's awake but nobody's listening. It's the best time to be a speaker. So, I'm a great fan of EU for its successful track record in policy. I get very skeptical when I hear about the new EU defense industry, or not defense industry, but defense initiative, because of the track record. It hasn't been stellar. Quite often the EU defense initiatives in the past have been used one of the 3 reasons, either the excuse to spend less, kind of we'll pool and share and we'll be more efficient so we can spend less, for protecting industry, European industry, and from protectionism you get less capable product later in the schedule and at a higher cost. Or sometimes it's been because of counter-Americanism. If European leaders don't get along with the leader or administration in Washington, then we get new defense initiatives. Last time was 2003 or so. I think example was Galileo was born. I had to Google Galileo to find out what's happened. So I found out that actually it's semi-operational now, 16 years later. And I don't know how many billions later, and almost successfully duplicating what GPS has been already doing. Sorry for being so skeptical. I don't know if some industry felt offended by that, but didn't mean to. It's just one example that popped into my mind. In the cyberspace, we can't afford to be counter at transatlantic relations. We are in the same cyber domain. Europe doesn't have the same firepower alone that we would have with our like-minded allies across the globe, not just across Atlantic, but also to the other side. There are great nations like Australia and Japan joining our CCD-COE. We're excited about that cooperation, and I hope this kind of a transatlantic and international cooperation will continue also throughout the European projects. That's the only way for them to be successful. And I'm very happy that the aircraft here on the picture looks a lot like American-built F-18, so we're not talking about complete protectionism, so that's good to see. So what is a successful way? Spending more, as you brought out. I don't know, different nations do it at a different pace, but with no particular nation in mind, raising your defense spending by 3% annually, 3% increments, that's called keeping up with inflation. That doesn't make up the capability gap that was left from underspending throughout 2 decades of peace dividends. So it needs to be significantly more spending. Coordination, cooperation, no duplication. Those are the key words. We can't afford to duplicate capabilities that are already existing somewhere else amongst the friends or allies. Especially in cyber, as in addition to wasting resources, money, we're also wasting human resources. There is a very tight pool of cyber experts that can work either in government or industry. So if we start duplicating functions and establishing operation centers where we need those expert people, we're competing not only against the industry but amongst different government institutions. That's unnecessary. There's a good example of competing for good human capital is on this panel. The previous director of CCD-COE works for private industry now, and about 3 good tech experts from our center work there as well. So it's competition is live and ongoing. There is a lack of human capital. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Tomasz, Poland is a member of both EU and NATO. It's also the home of an established defense industry. What is your take on this?
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. As a representative of Polish government, I couldn't start differently than with saying congratulations to the organizers, which is Polish think tank. Good job. Next Cybersec is a good opportunity to talk a little bit more about cooperation, which is a crucial thing, and we are talking about this about it almost on every edition of Cybersec. But here in Brussels, of course, European Union is our main point of reference. So the questions asked was, can and will Europe play a big role in global cybersecurity environment? And well, I guess that European Union itself and the European countries have everything what is needed, what is necessary to play one of the main, or maybe the main roles in global cyber security environment, starting from, of course, users and societies very familiar and open to new technologies. Then a lot of centers of excellence, a lot of science R&D units, and then industry that can change ideas into the real solutions. A lot of operational entities, and I guess that there is a big framework for a comprehensive approach, because there is a wide range of threats, especially in the eastern flank of NATO, which is also an eastern flank of European Union. There is a very high level of understanding of threats coming from all of the operational domains excluded by the NATO. For example, look at the location of and the specific of centers of excellence that NATO established, starting from Estonia, CCD-COE, then Latvia, Riga, Stratcom, strategic communication. Then we have Lithuania, which is a leading country in one of the very interesting PESCO projects, Cyber Rapid Response Teams, which are a member of from November 2018 as Poland. Then Poland, of course, as I mentioned, Polish think tank is one of the main organizer of this event. But also we have in Krakow military counterintelligence center of excellence. So there's a high level of understanding of threats coming from different domains, like cyber domain, of course. And speaking about comprehensive approach, I won't say only about what I believe in or what I think of that issue, but also a few words about what we are really doing in Poland. On February 5th this year, we have launched a program called cyber.mil.pl, which is dedicated to develop all the pillars of cybersecurity, because it is not a question of developing military aspects, civilian aspects, R&D projects, intelligence services, military units, universities, academia in general. They're all very important, and comprehensive approach is a way of developing every one of them. Of course, I can say that I believe that some of them are, shall go first. For example, building stable structures, or education and training, which is crucial for, especially for public sector, because it is easier to create experts than to buy them from market, which is slightly impossible. But what we have established, what we have launched in Poland, is dedicated to boost almost every pillar of the system. So since 2015, we have tripled the number of cadets in our military universities in studies connected with cyberspace generally, so cybersecurity, cryptology, IT, and so on. And then, well, we have decided to create cyberspace defense forces as a military component of our armed forces. It is a process ongoing now. There is an offer for the ones who wants to still play a part in civilian market as experts in civilian companies, for example, but also be a part of military. So we are building a cyber component in territorial defense forces, like in National Guard in United States. And we are joining and uniting units to create cybersecurity national cybersecurity center. We are developing R&D projects. We have a strong belief in R&D. We are cooperating with, of course, with European agencies. We have a strong belief in PESCO projects. Some of them are really very interesting, because they are not only focusing on exchanging information and so on, but also about really dealing with operational and cases, like the project led by Lithuania, this Cyber Rapid Response Teams project, which is an operational one, which is not only about creating an environment, but working together in case of a real incidents. So coming back, I have a minute. Coming back to a little bit to EU funding, because especially you have started from the question, and I guess that what is very important, that's why I mentioned about COEs located in the eastern flank. I guess that so-called geographic balance is important, because it is real crucial, very important that industries, companies from all over Europe and European Union have the same access to the resources and funding, EU funding, and besides geographic balance, so-called, we may call it maybe scale balance. Not only the biggest companies, not only the largest ones, but also small and medium enterprises, startups, and mid-caps companies. I guess there is a great potential, innovative potential, in those companies which are not the greatest ones, and not only coming from the Western countries.
Thank you. Merle, you as a defense industry representative on the panel, so defense industry is really an important actor, because it holds a lot of knowledge and skills that we really need. And small and medium enterprises are often heralded for their ability to innovate faster and have really bring that added value to European defense and security. How do you see this question?
Well, thank you, and also thank you for having a voice from the industry in the panel. Great to be here. Well, I believe that whereas the primary responsibility for national security, including in cyberspace, lies within the member states, including the governments and the private sector, then EU definitely can and does add value to all of this. And you, Wolfgang, started it off, but a few sort of key phrases that resonate for me as coming from the private sector. Well, more in generally, over the past 5 years, I believe the EU regulations and directives have had a really serious impact on cybersecurity of member states, including both at government level and the private sector. Few concrete examples include the NIST directive, which stimulates a strategic and operational cooperation among EU member state stakeholders. The new certification framework, which is highly relevant in the current standoff with China in the 5G and Huawei discussion. And naturally, the proposals for a significant new funding for cybersecurity in the EU's next budget, the EU's Cybersecurity Competence Center. There, I believe the devil really is in the detail, and I'll be intrigued to look how the implementation of the Digital Europe program, along with the new financing, is really happening after the EU elections. But above all, I'd like to focus here in my short intervention, the 5 minutes, I'd like to focus on the strategic approach, because for the private sector, as well as for the governments, it all really starts from the strategic understanding of cyber threats. And here, I believe it's the key is for the private sector, for the supervisory board, as well as the executive directors, who need to understand and approach cybersecurity as an enterprise-wide management issue, not just as an IT issue. It's something that was echoed in previous panels, but I cannot agree more, because it all starts about understanding where you need to direct the investments. The thinking so far has often gone wrong, and I believe the small and medium companies are a little bit bigger culprits here often than the bigger enterprises. The thinking goes wrong when the technology is regarded as a support function rather than the core business agent and instrument. And this approach to cybersecurity as a support function leaves cybersecurity to the techies, to someone else, to the IT department. And well, it stems for the historic corporate, siloed corporate structures and approach. The slippery slope of this is that when the critical cybersecurity responsibility is handed off to the IT, this is the department that in most organizations is strapped for resources and has cut budget. So we're not really investing enough into cyber. So cybersecurity as an enterprise-wide risk management issue needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed both from the strategic, from the operational, cross-departmental, and economic perspective. And it all starts from asking the right questions, knowing to ask the right questions. And here I'd like to compliment the European Defence Agency along with the EU, who were the ones who really believed into the importance of asking the right questions. And that was when the EDA supported the Estonian initiative back in September 2017, when during the Estonian EU Council presidency, for the first time ever in Tallinn, EU defense ministers gathered for an informal meeting and sat down for an hour and a half out of their busy schedules for a tabletop cybersecurity exercise, Cyber 2017. First time ever. So what did the defense ministers actually, what were some of the key questions that they asked? The key analytical questions fell into 4 categories, basically. Time is about how much time do we have during a cyber crisis, and how far can plans be made ahead? how much time ahead can plans be made. Secondly, transparency, which deals with the question of public exposure to your decisions. Thirdly, authority, which is about how much high or low do you delegate the authority during the cyber crisis solutions or finding out solutions to a cyber incident. And finally, cooperation, which is about both cooperation with the industry, cooperation within intergovernmental agencies, but also cooperation with EU or between EU and NATO, because back at the exercise in Estonia, there were EU defense ministers along with Mogherini, but also the NATO section, Stoltenberg participated. So it was a really useful way to simulate how the two organizations work together. So I believe that this exercise or this lesson learned is relevant not just for the defense ministers, but cyber exercises should go beyond the military community boundaries and include other ministers. Why not ministers of foreign affairs, finance? Everybody has a stake, and not just the ministries, but also the private sector enterprises, the board members. Some of the sort of lessons learned and check questions could include how often is cybersecurity discussed at board meetings or for the government meetings in that regard? What are the, from the company's perspective, what are the company's most critical data assets? How do the IT systems interact with these data assets? Are we spending wisely on cybersecurity? And finally, do we know if the spending on IT is cost effective? And here, and I probably am I close to summing up to understanding whether the spending is cost effective. Again, exercises are a good way for stock taking, and especially in the military realm. Exercises are times when militaries get certified, qualified, so on. So I remember from back the days when I worked with the Estonian president, we visited a NATO steadfast juncture exercise in Estonia, that was back in 2012, but it was a computer exercise where the overall goal was to develop a command and control interoperability for NATO forces. So there were about 400 NATO officers and NCOs in different bunkers in Estonia. Everybody had a computer in front of them, and we tried to understand what was going on. And we really didn't understand, because there was no visualization. It was very, very difficult to really get at the top level for the president, for the ministers, for the management, for the top leadership. It's difficult to understand cyber, and in order to mitigate that, one of the crucial aspects is to provide clear visualization. So, as a way of summing up, I believe first, well, speaking of the future, but this is really short-term future, I think at first is we need to focus at the demystification or demystifying cyber for the top leadership, because this is where they are the ones who adopt decisions. And demystification can take place through tabletop exercises as well as visualization of cyber exercises. My second point would be the importance of cyber hygiene as the foundation really of cybersecurity, cyber hygiene from the whole of society approach and from the whole of government approach. And thirdly and finally, the importance of cyber threat intelligence sharing. And I hear the criticism of the ENISA representative earlier that you need to be specific about what you share and whom you share. When looking ahead for this year, for 2019, and speaking about cyber threat intelligence sharing, for me this is what is crucial, is that we look very carefully at what goes on in Ukraine, where within about a month time we have the presidential elections and then parliamentary elections further down the line, and exchange the threat analysis and look very carefully at what happens in Kiev. Why should we care about the election security in Ukraine and Kiev? Because what happens in Kiev will very soon hit us in Brussels, in Rome, in Amsterdam, and in DC maybe. And I'll conclude here, and let's discuss some of the things in the Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot of interesting perspectives, and also questions are coming up. One of that is drawing on the last point of information sharing. Looking at the EU's level of ambition, do you think that we have set it on the right level? Is there scope for being even more ambitious? And especially when it comes to cooperation with other partners. So we had cooperation with NATO, other international organizations, but also Jaak mentioned non-EU nation states, such as US, Australia, or other partners. And even more so cooperation with our own European defense industry and industrial partners. Are we ambitious enough right now? Or if not, what else can we do to really make the most of these partnerships, at the same time avoiding the potential vulnerabilities that could come about through cooperation? I'll start with you because you brought up the issue.
I brought up the issue. Well, I think there are some basic rules and regulations quite usefully set up by EU. I refer to the GDPR requirements to inform about breaches that involve our personal data. There are rules regarding sharing and breaches regarding included in the NIST directive. At the closer to the grassroots level, I believe it boils down to the trust that is built within nations, if we speak of member states. And if I think of Estonia's example, it is the Estonian State Information Authority, which is an agency responsible for the security and the integrity of the Estonian X-Road and online services, and they are the ones striving to build the community of cybersecurity actors and stakeholders, keeping together the interagency cooperation from the government side, but also including the private sector key players, and keeping the dialogue ongoing and making sure that information sharing is not overburdened, but that right information is shared at the same time. Yet again, it is clear that in cyber, geographical borders become less and less meaningful, especially when we speak of enterprises. We have big companies that go beyond national borders, and there is the question of the cross-sector cross-private sector threat intelligence sharing amongst each other, and how much that is regulated and whether there is room for more. I perhaps pass the microphone on that for people who are wiser here in Brussels and also residing here in Brussels, who know better of like what's cooking.
First of all, I doubt whether I'm wiser than you, but I want to dwell on 2 points on the question. You mentioned the term trust, and one of the things I was always emphasizing is when we talk about trust, we should not talk in general about trust. Trust has a wide span from total untrust to full trust, which I expect, or which I think is not existing between individuals. So this is the span, and I have people or entities I trust more, and I have people and entities I trust less. And that trust level should, to a certain extent, give an indicator how much I'm willing to share, or how much the entities are willing to share. And I agree with Steve, who mentioned in the beginning, sharing should have a purpose, because otherwise I drown in information, because I have the problem to select which is now relevant for me and which not. Therefore, that's one of the aspects, and where I clearly think we can do more at this stage at European level. I don't want to talk about exchange between member states on the civil side. I don't want to talk about exchange, sharing of information for collective defense. That is much more on the side of NATO. But I want to talk about information sharing for military operation, which are EU-led, and there we have clearly room for improvement. although we have now a cyber cell as element of incent within the hybrid fusion cell, we don't have made general provisions yet that we have the same information sharing level when it comes to cyber for specific operations. I think here we should start to set a common standard and to develop a common concept for information sharing and to do the prerequisites. Operations are usually ad hoc, alert military operations, but the more we are able to reach back to already agreed standard operating procedures, and we know what we want to exchange and with whom, the faster we get the operation running. And with that, I want to hand over to the rest of the panel.
During almost every conference of that type, we are talking a lot about cooperation and information sharing. And of course, it's crucial, it's very important, and it is obvious in a way, because, you know, in a national dimension, in a multinational dimension, the threats are coming from different directions. Almost any country, I guess, is capable of dealing with them alone. But it is not easy, of course, we have to say it, and I guess that we are all aware that information sharing in this domain, especially in military domain, in the intelligence domain, it is not easy, and although it is crucial, it is very important. And sometimes it has to be enforced, of course, by law, by the legal framework, especially due to critical infrastructure and some of the most important entities. But it is not easy. It is a case, it is a task for the NATO, it is a task for European Union to create a framework, to integrate, to create interoperability, to create systems that will allow us to exchange the information in a safe way. And so it is a task for everyone, because we have, I guess that we are all aware that it is very important, it is obvious, it is not easy, it is still not easy in national dimension, so where are we in multinational, in international level? It is not only a question of European countries, of European Union itself. For example, in the United States cyber security strategy, there is not ongoing but upcoming, I guess, initiative, cyber deterrence initiative, which I guess it is an idea to strengthen cooperation with the allies, with the partners, which will enforce information sharing and a wider range of common initiatives like exercises and so on. So I guess not only Europe, not only our partners in this region are thinking about how to create a common environment, but also United States, also of course mentioned here Australia and so on. It is a matter of creating the safe, proper environment and to build a trust. It is not something that can be given at a moment. It is a process that can be instructed in a second and is being built for years. So.
I have pieces left. Three smart people have spoken on a topic. There are a lot of C's in the organization, in the name of the organization where I now work, CCD-COE. The first C stands for cooperation or cooperative, and I didn't get it half a year ago when I got to the job. It took me less than a week to get how important that cooperation is. So absolutely crucial. Steve said very eloquently in the last panel that the answer is not sharing more, it is sharing the right stuff. The real world example would be everybody's had the colleague in the office that CCs everything to everybody, and in the end you don't read, you just delete those emails. So that's the bad kind of, that's sharing more without regard of whether it's necessary or not. So I fully subscribe to last panel's suggestion that sharing, I don't remember it, but is it the right stuff to the right people at the right time? And there was one more thing that I need to find the person who said it and then learn it. So. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. So another important aspect of cyber defense is really that it's not only about the product, it's not only about the hardware and software, it is also about the person, so the human capital and the skills and knowledge we have. During this panel, also previously, and a lot of my own organization around Europe's work has focused on the criticality of cyber-related skills, not only in the government, but also in the private private domains, and really the shortages of people who have the right skills for the right purpose. I know that you are all aware of this problem, and I was just wondering, what is your opinion about what can we do on an EU or national level in order to improve the situation, to ensure that Europe is able to, Europe actually has the capability and the human capital in order to ensure cyber defense capability and is not sort of vulnerable to these shortages.
We're a training organization also. Can I start here?
Sure.
It seems that the problem of
Excellent.
scarce human capital follows me, because coming from the Air Force, where all the Air Forces in the world are facing huge pilot shortage, now we're facing in cyber huge tech expertise shortage, and not only tech, it's also legal, cyber, all the other sorts of experts there are. Training and education is the answer. I don't have the answer how to get young people to the military and to military cyber and keep them there. If I did, I'd start my own consulting company and sold the idea. But we do offer a lot of training courses to the military people who are already in their militaries, and that nations deem to send to our courses, not because of who are not in the military. And while my first statement was somewhat gloomy, then yes, we have great cooperation with EDA, and you have participated in Lock Shields, which is the largest live fire cyber defense exercise in the world, and everybody who's participated there, all the teams, more than 1,000 people, 22 teams last year, were very, very grateful for the realistic training that they received. But we can't do it all on our own. We always have line out of the door for our training courses. So there needs to be more education and training in cyber, so that the market's wide open for the private sector, government sector to establish better training programs.
Any more short answers, because we only have a couple of minutes?
Maybe from me one or 2 points. Jaak mentioned in the end there is a market. Yes, and that's one of the important things to understand. Cyber defense or cybersecurity education and training is a market with an enormous volume. And that's, I think, we have to understand on the industrial side, but also on the side of, I would say, the consumers, or those who need the human capital, or the humans who are dealing with that. That I have to come to a balanced system where I use industry training to a great extent, for sure, at the level primarily for the cyber defense or cybersecurity specialists, so the true specialists. But I also have to augment this with awareness program for my entire set of employees, and what mentioned by Merle, that I train my decision makers correctly to take the right decision and to have the right understanding about what cyber means for them, for their operations, being there an industry company, but also or a military commander. That he is not interested in the technical aspects. He is interested in the mission impact cyber events can have, and there we have to train him or her to understand this.
What I'd add into the story is cyber hygiene and basic cyber literacy, or basic digital literacy. I believe that's something that should be introduced already at early age in schools, age 6, age 7, and why not have some EU best practices in that regard. Also important, I believe, as Jaak mentioned, that we don't just need IT geeks, but we need cyber experts who have philosophy background, sociology background, legal background, and so on and so on. So it's not just the STEMs that should be encouraged to study, but I think cyber should be a layer in every educational program, be it humanitarian or the economics or IT.
Tomasz, any answer?
One of the most important things in cyber domain in general, I guess, that creating, building, developing human potential, human capital is one of the most important tasks for public sector, and it is a great stream for public-private cooperation, because we as a public sector need experts, need to train them, and in different ways, in different manners, because not all of them have to accomplish 5-year studies, which is the effect is delayed. Sometimes we should use the American way of thinking, as I understand it, because we don't always need to look for a genius youngster. Sometimes we need just a clever one that will get a proper training, provided sometimes, but by the private sector, which is, as I mentioned, a great stream for PPP, for public-private cooperation. And we have to be open. One example. Last year on November in Poland we have organized, some say the biggest, some say the second largest hackathons in the world, and first time in history Polish armed forces were partnering, were a part of this hackathon. We have organized cybersecurity component in this event, and it was that successful that just after this hackathon, just after this event, we get about, I don't know, maybe 100 curriculums, people interested in service in different units of Polish Ministry of National Defense area.
Thank you. And here, very quickly, and I think we can hear the hunger in the audience already as we're preparing for the lunch break. So very quickly, just in a couple of words, last question from me is, how do you see what could be the multinational cooperation frameworks, areas, or ways and means how we could contribute to European defense and enhance it? I'll start with Jaak.
I don't have specific projects to name right now, but key is to avoid duplication and to do it for the right motives, not to do it in spite of some temporal disagreements that are in transatlantic relations, but to do it to make Europe and the Western Democratic Alliance stronger.
Tomasz?
Well, first of all, I'm a big fan of need-driven approach. So there has to be a need and an answer, given by the proper project. So first of all, the military sector, the civilian sector, in cooperation shall generate the need, and then the answer coming from the EU projects. As I understand sometimes and very often as enhancing the NATO capabilities, like we look on PESCO projects, for example, it is a good idea of building together competences using the tools added and connected with the NATO specific of the operational domain, and with the EU, with all the cyber policy ideas and cyber policy tools.
Thank you.
Maybe one point from my side, and that is technology related. To bring technology innovation through the valley of death. I want to describe this quite shortly. Technical readiness level describes technologies from 0 to 8. And academia is interested in the baseline research because there's the Nobel Prize to win. Industry is interested in 7 to 8 because that's what they can sell. We have a valley of death between 4 to 6. And I think that should be one of the things with venture money, with seed funding, to bring this through our technology development, especially in cyber, through this valley of death. And there I see especially the European Defence Fund as a good instrument which could be utilized for this, linking better the excellent academic base we have in Europe with the existing excellent industry. I think there we have to get closer.
Thank you. Merle?
Yeah, well, for a conclusion, rather than throwing out new initiatives, I believe we should implement the ones that we've committed today. And when saying that within NATO framework, I think of the importance of Article 3 and the responsibility of each member state and the NATO cyber defense pledge, which I believe was very relevantly signed in Warsaw in 2016, that should need to be implemented. And on EU side, also go on with the implementation of Digital Europe program. One last thought, I think when government agencies are focusing primarily, and both on the NATO and EU side, the NIS directive and the NATO cyber pledge for that matter, when government agencies are focusing primarily on defending nations' critical infrastructure, and surely that is very, very important, I believe it is crucial not to forget the importance of private sector cooperation across the industry and include wider parts of the enterprises than just critical infrastructure, because due to the immense amount of data interconnection among the data systems, it is no longer adequate for the enterprises or the organizations to just secure their own network, but they also have to think of their vendors, their partners, their suppliers, and their customers. And it so often is that many organizations are interconnected with elements of the national and cross-national critical infrastructure, while they themselves are something rather insignificant, and raising the prospect of cyber insecurity of one company becoming the vulnerability of the whole system. So that is crucial, and I think a way to test this cross-dependencies through technical cyber exercises, cyber range-based exercises is where the future is.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the panel. Let's give them a hand. And thank you to the audience persevering up until the lunch break. Thank you.